All right, everybody, I think we're going to get started with our next session now. So hello and welcome to Track 3, Drug Development Getting into the Clinic, sponsored by PRA Health Sciences. My name is Maureen Hart, and I am very excited to be hosting for this morning breakout Track 3 session. As a reminder, this track is being live streamed, and I'd like to welcome our remote attendees and to remind everyone that it's not too late to download our mobile app and use some of our highlighted features like the live Q&A. So this session is all about understanding what you need to have in hand before heading out to industry and talking about structuring and developing collaborations. Our speakers today are Sarah Boyce, the Chief Business Officer of Ionis Pharmaceuticals, and Rob Ring, CEO of
Vencerx.
I apologize, Vencerx Therapeutics. Please join me in welcoming them both.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for hanging in there. I know we've got lunch coming up right after this, but real pleasure to be here. I actually spent yesterday at the Rare Partnering and Investor Forum. I know not everybody made that event too, but it was really fantastic event focused largely on brokering interactions among folks working in industry, investors and whatnot. And what we thought we'd do with this session is try to take some perspectives drawn from our own professional journeys to better inform all of you working in the patient organization space as you think about engaging industry. And, there are a lot of questions that come up. As I'll share in a moment, have worked many sides of this challenge. And our goal here with the session is to really make this as interactive as possible. And my comrade, Sarah Boyce, and I will really try to use the time to answer as many questions as we can. We see, just from past experience, you get a lot more out of folks just surfacing what's on their mind as they think about industry. And how to approach industry and what's to be gained from it. Just a little bit back on my own background, and Sarah will provide a few points on her journey as well, just to offer some context to the perspectives that we'll be sharing, if anything, to kind of credential them a bit for you. I'm the CEO of a early stage biotech that's developing targeted therapeutics for the autism spectrum. And we are really focused mostly on prosecuting autism from a medicines development point of view through the lens of rare disease, really focusing on genetically defined subtypes. I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I just thought I'd put together a little graphic that shows you my own professional journey. Before I ever took this job 5 months ago, I've spent time working in the nonprofit space, the industry world, as well as maintain my roots in academia. I still teach a drug development course at Drexel. Started in industry as a discovery and development scientist, and headed a groundbreaking autism unit at Pfizer before leaving there to work as the chief science officer at Autism Speaks for almost 5 years, and have consulted. But the point here really is, I've worn a lot of hats, and I've really seen this challenge that patient organizations, large and small, have faced in trying to understand what there is to gain by engaging industry and how to approach that. And there really isn't any one right way to do it. And so what we thought we'd do ahead of questions and discussion is just sort of tee up the session by going through a few organizing principles, as I usually like to say, and hopefully you'll find these sort of a grounding in what we can talk about. I think it's really important, if you're thinking about engaging industry, before you even start that, it's really important to appreciate a number of things. Industry isn't one thing. Industry really is an ecosystem of partners and organizations that may be working collectively, collaboratively, competitively with one another to advance science from the proverbial bench to the bedside. along this canonical pathway of value creation in science that extends from basic research that happens in academia all the way through clinical trials and ultimately into the market where they're made available to you, to patients, to communities. And so when you think about what you should be doing or what you could be doing to turn science into things that matter for your families, you really need to appreciate that this isn't a single opportunity for you. There's not one company or one type of company. There potentially could be many different companies, many types of organizations that you could interact with and develop strategies for interacting with. So it's really important to point that out. And I've sort of listed a view of those companies as they map onto this value chain of science. And as you can see, they include pharmaceutical companies, but they could be research technology companies that are coming up with innovations that make it possible to do clinical trials. They could be pharmacies and hospital systems that ultimately deliver these or ensure that these are delivered in the context of services. And there are regulatory bodies and publishing firms that have to publish the science to make sure it's disseminated appropriately. So it's a really complex ecosystem, if you will, and it can be a bit daunting to tackle that. But it's important to remember a few things. What's likely going to happen as you engage industry is you have to recognize that you are the expert. And industry, if this is a disease they have not worked on, are going to be depending on you to help create that opportunity for them. They may know nothing about your individual rare disease, so it's really important for you to play that role in helping teach them about your disease. How is it diagnosed? How many people are there? What is that patient journey that every individual experiences from diagnosis through treatment? What is the standard of care? What's working? Where's the secret sauce, et cetera? What's the unmet need, essentially? If a drug company asked you, okay, if we could make one drug today that would create value for you, for the most individuals in your population, what would that look like? What would that drug actually treat? Assuming everybody wants a cure, you have to assume that that may not always be possible, but the ability to move science against things that matter, symptoms, et cetera, will be important for you to articulate to them. So organizing this information ahead of time is essential to having very organized conversations with industry. It's also important that you play a very critical role in helping introduce them to your community. And your community is not just the community of patients. You know better who in the world is working on your particular science, where are the key researchers found, what are the key clinical centers doing treatment and research around the world. Are there conferences that they should be attending? Are there public-private sources of funding that are funding this group? These are all very valuable pieces of information that you have the ability to help jumpstart internal activity at a company if you could provide them. It's work they don't have to do. And this is something you probably already own. And it's a sort of low-hanging fruit for you to be able to organize ahead of any interaction. You also are experts in ensuring, or you might be already making investments as an organization through funding. They're helping improve the clinical trial readiness of your community. So oftentimes the barrier to entry for companies into a new disease area is simple things like, how are we going to find patients? Where are they located? What are the barriers to participating in research that might be unique to your community? We heard earlier this morning the importance of having registries as sort of a vehicle to help achieve this. So these areas of work are really critical things that most organizations are thinking about or organizing, and it's something you can bring to the table to industry to help teach them. Depending on how mature the research community is working on your disease, you may already know that there are researchers that need things that industry might have, and you can use your interaction with industry to help broker or achieve access to them. Sometimes it's simply helping researchers gain access to tool compounds or tool medicines that might be lying on the shelf of drug companies that may help advance research. that you might be able to help them gain access to technologies that industry have, screening platforms for finding new drugs, et cetera. Many different things that you can play a role in there. Believe it or not, I can't tell you how often we've used in my past lives interactions with patient organizations to help identify the key people in the field that we should be talking to. Who are the key thought leaders in this field from your perspective? Who should we be talking to? Are there what we call key opinion leaders, KOLs, or another way of referring to these? Are there, if we were to start an effort internally, are there people we should consider hiring that have expertise and perspective that may jumpstart internal activities? And you're aware more of anyone who's actually working on this from a company point of view. Are there companies already trying to develop medicines or assistive technologies or nutritional products or you name it? You know that better than others, and these leads can actually help move things forward more quickly with industry. And they're things that you can organize ahead of time. These are just simply a few things to help sort of organize your thinking about what you could be doing ahead of interactions with industry. But I think what we'll find a lot of value in here is just being able to answer questions. If you're thinking about industry, what questions do you have that we could help with? And with that, I'll allow Sarah to tell a little about her own background to supplement whatever has been provided already in the program. Well,
I'm assuming that my mic is on. So I've been in the industry for over 25 years. I actually am almost a different journey into the industry from Rob, and I actually started as a sales representative. I have been involved in the launch of several life-changing drugs, and I'm not a scientist, but I have a deep appreciation for what science can do because I've seen it firsthand. Today I work at Ionis, where I'm the Chief Business Officer. Ionis is just down the road. We're in Carlsbad, so it was a short drive for me to get here. That probably sounds like I'm gloating for those of you who had long flights. And at Ionis, and part of my role as CBO is we have a whole range of different partnerships. We're a company that is founded on science. We're grounded on two core principles. One, sick people depend on us, and then the other is on science. And we partner continually with the academic community and with the patient community, and have really been able, I think to the point you made, as to how that's been able to accelerate ultimately being able to get a drug to patients as quickly as possible, which is what we all want to be able to do. And we also partner with many different companies as well, so I have a pretty good insight on how other companies work, as well as not just Ionis, because we have a whole range of corporate partners. I've also lived in a whole range of different countries, so for those of you who aren't necessarily from the US, I've also seen the industry, academia, and advocacy partnership work really well in many different places around the globe. So that kind of gives you a sort of a brief around some of my history and journey, and as to why when we were brainstorming with Global Genes about some things to do at the conferences, to one of the aspects was talking about doing a session like this, to really discuss about how we can work better together and what are some of the ways to really approach industry and advocate, for your particular areas of interest. So, I mean, we'd be delighted to answer questions and to sort of, there always needs to be one brave soul to start.
Well, just curious, real quick, how many folks here are working with or in organizations that do have active engagement with companies or anyone in that value chain of sciences? So that's good.
Hi, I had a question about registries. We have a registry that is not housed in our organization, it's housed at a university that we work with and we fund. There are far less patients in the registry than exist in our database as an organization. Our current registry does not have natural history data. And so in looking to think about what would be most important for us to focus on in terms of funding, would it be more important for us to get that natural history data with the goal of being able to establish better meaningful endpoints for the FDA? Or does it matter to industry whether or not the patients that we would be able to provide information about the clinical trials to are in the registry or in our organization's database, and we should focus on getting more patients into the registry? So is more data or more patients, I guess, more important to industry?
Well, I think, again, you put yourself in the mindset of someone in industry, what's driving the need here? And it frequently is recruitment. So if we have a trial or a potential trial with an agent that we think fits with your population, how are we going to find those individuals that we can recruit into the trial? And it may not be just numbers, it may be specific types of individuals with a specific genotype or a specific symptom, or could be any number of things. So beyond numbers and beyond the structure, access is important. How folks are consented to be contacted is an important dimension to how you want to set up a registry as well. You collect as many individuals as you want, but if we have no ability to, or it's encumbered by process that slows things down, that can be a challenge. Yeah, I think you have the potential to grow your registry to serve as a vehicle for natural history work. At the same time, you're growing it in scale to serve whatever the clinical trial readiness needs are of a industry partner out there.
I think just to add, one of the things certainly that we look when we start a program, and this is at its early stage, one of the questions we ask is what's the natural history data and what natural history data is available. To your point of how it can inform trial endpoint design, but also in some very rare diseases, the natural history data can be used as a mechanism to have some sort of comparison. I know certainly when we've had diseases that we've worked on where we have a really good perspective on natural history, I can absolutely tell you we've been able to design a better program. We've been able to design a better program, not just with better sets of endpoints, but even more insight as to how we should operationalize the study. I use an example of one disease area that we worked in where we didn't understand the natural history that well, so hands up on that one. And when we designed the study, we actually had this whole range of tests that people would do over the course of a day. And for someone who didn't have the disease, that was a lot. The thing that we missed was that in this particular disease, one of the symptoms is crippling fatigue. So we took very fatigued patients and then had this whole battery of tests that we were asking them to do over the course of a day, which, we got through it and we worked and adapted as we went along. But it's a very practical example about how if we had had a better understanding of the natural history and the disease itself, we could have designed not just a study with better endpoints, but just a better study from an operational aspect. So for us, one of the first things is always, is there a natural history database available? If there isn't, how can we try and develop that? And then also, is there a registry? And if there's a registry available, to your point, it's then, okay, well, how can we partner with regards to the registry to be able to get people the information that they need about a study that they potentially could participate in?
Hi, thank you all for speaking. My name is Haley Euler. I'm with CEPBP1 Society, and we are a ultra-rare single gene neurodevelopmental disorder. It's caused by the CEPBP1 gene. And there's another lady I met right here. She's in the exact same boat with HIVE-P2. So our children and others, so we've set up a registry. We're starting natural history study. We don't know what the protein that's impacted does. We don't have an animal model. We're at really ground zero getting started. And so my question is, if you were in our shoes, what would be your next steps? We're very small. Like we're up to 19. We're up to about 10 families here, you know, in this other one. What would be your recommendation for first next steps?
You want to start with some of that from a research perspective?
Well, I think you've already made, a very important initial step that I advise organizations large and small to do, and that is to start that registry process with the assumption that there are going to be others out there that you don't know about now that you can bring into that. And so creating an architecture that can absorb that growth of the community is an essential first step. Not knowing the maturity of the knowledge base around that gene or the disease, hard to know how to guide you on next steps with there. If there are researchers that are working on that, if you've not already forged relationships with, they're ones that you should be.
And so like in our example, there is one we're currently working to work with. No one is actively researching yet. And it's neurodevelopmental, so it's, as we don't know it to be degenerative. But like we know one researcher, but it's kind of like there's just so many different angles, and I'm sure this researcher has an idea of where he's going to take it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that would be best for the organization. So I was just seeing if you might, basically other innovative, not your typical path, or other options that might be recommended. But
I think even beyond your registry, and I tried to make a point of this on one of the slides, assuming that at some point you may have the ability to recruit others into helping address the needs of your community, whether or not they're in industry or they're clinical researchers or they're basic fundamental researchers working on finding that protein and understanding its function, and which will in turn hopefully inform targets for treatment, et cetera. You do have 19 journeys that need to be understood, that are in your hand right now, that could be mapped out, and information around that. How is it first diagnosed? What are the symptoms? What is the progression of that? What's working? What may not be working, and helping to improve outcome where that's possible. Organizing that into a sort of crisp body of knowledge can be that entry point as you recruit others into it. You have your own narrative as a parent or as a family member that gives helps to create a psychological hook for people to work on. But what you already know and are experiencing in your own journey is information that will inform research even before something's done in a Petri dish, if you will. And that's something you could be doing right now.
Yeah, I think one of the other aspects is, as you grow and you're 19 now, that there's also, you're not alone, and the other groups who've been in your shoes from a starting point. And I think that's one of the aspects around this conference that's actually really powerful, is in terms of bringing people together from different communities, whilst they may not be, for different diseases, but it's the aspect of how you can learn from, what they did and what they did to get going. And I know it seems like you're targeting in particular with one researcher, but I would go through everything of who else can you get to, and who else can you kind of get engaged and get sort of involved is a core aspect. Developing the animal models is really important because it kind of then becomes your basis from an aspect of being able to look at a therapeutic. You really need some sort of model to work with. So I think you're targeting it on the right thing around getting that going. But it's also sort of, and I see people nodding their heads, is picking the brains of others who've been down that same road.
Yeah, it's great points. And I would only add to that, it can be really daunting, I get that, if you don't know anything about the research process or science, et cetera. Knowing where to start, who to ask, it can be insurmountable at times. But through events like this and making contacts here, I would strongly recommend trying to find someone who works in the research world, whether or not their work is relevant or not. If they understand the lay of the land in science, to work as an advisor to you to help understand where you might start there. It's like I always, when I make this advice to other groups, it's a matter if you're going to visit another country or a big city somewhere and you don't know anything about that city, you could read things in the book, or you could find someone who's local to that, speaks the language, understands the customs, knows how to channel what your interests are and what your unique needs are into an experience that matters. I think if it's an ultra rare indication and there's not much known, you need an advisor like this. And there are people like myself here and others who would be happy to help out, to organize a little bit of that to point you in the right direction, to get you started. You have to be fearless, which I'm sure there's no shortage of that in this community, I have found, to just go out and ask, can you help me make these connections if I don't know where they are already?
Yeah, another program that might be great for you to learn about, and I think I see Yael from Ultragenyx. Ultragenyx is actually doing some more work to help people in this situation, so I don't know if whoever's got the mic, but it may be great for Yael, if you will, to talk a little bit about what you're doing, because I think there's a program that could possibly help you also.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm from Ultragenyx, and together with a few other companies, Odentis, that is a gene therapy company, Fulcrum, Takeda, we're organizing an entrepreneurship workshop for parents or patients who are looking to develop a therapy or start a company. It will be a 2-day workshop in Novato, California, not far from here. And we'll try to cover all aspects of drug development, sort of compressing everything that's being talked about here into 2 days in a small forum, and then maybe follow up with small mentorship groups that will help parents and patients continue their journey. So if you want any additional information, I'll be here at the end of the talk. Thanks, Sarah, again.
Thank you. So that may have answered my question, but I'll maybe just expand on it a little bit. We're at the other end of the spectrum. I'm involved with the Children's Tumor Foundation, which relates to neurofibromatosis, NF. And we actually have a large patient population. We have the registry, we have a biobank, we have the natural history, we have, you go through the list of what a pharmaceutical company would want to develop a drug, and we've got that data set. We don't have genomic data, but what we don't have is a way to engage pharma in a way to, how do we take a data set that we have and engage a pharmaceutical company to get interest around that data set? We kind of don't know how to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Any guidance there?
So maybe...
And then as a follow-up, how important is that genomic data to a company in terms of building out the data set?
Yeah, so maybe if I talk a little bit around, firstly, how to perhaps figure out who to target, so who may be the companies that would be good to approach, and then I can talk a little bit about different ways to approach, and Robert, I'm sure you've got ideas as well. But so I would look for companies who are either in parallel or similar spaces, because it's something then that they've already have a set of expertise and probably already have people who are working on programs that may not necessarily be identical, but will have similar types of challenges. The other thing is, in terms of who's publishing, quite often you can see in there that there's sneaks where you'll see industry people pop up. And in that situation, I would go after the scientists directly. I would figure out what their email is or connect with them through LinkedIn and actually approach that way. I mean, at Ionis, that happens all the time. And one of the other aspects from in working with companies is where there is a patient advocacy group, they're really good. There's tremendous people acting in patient advocacy roles in companies. I have the awesome Christina at Ionis, and there's equally awesome people at other companies as well, whose part of their passion is the aspect of sick people depending on the companies, and can help shepherd some of that through and almost act as an internal champion. Key in anything in life, you've got to find your champion. But as a way of filtering, you can filter companies who may be more likely, and then I would hone in on specific people you can get through from the science. Patient advocacy is also a really great route if a company has patient advocacy. Sometimes when you're really small, you don't yet. So it depends on the company. I mean, Rob, what would be your sort of ideas?
The word champion just resonates with me because I think that really hits the nail right on the head. Finding the champion and engaging in activities that increase the probability that you'll find champions are step one. Arming that champion with impactful information that enables them to be that champion in a way that is aligned with the needs that you are advocating is the next step. And I think, sort of anecdotally, I headed the autism unit at Pfizer, which is the biggest, pharmaceutical company in the world, and it was started before I took that role. I was at Wyeth and trying to get autism on the map as a champion internally at Wyeth and getting both barrels every time I tried it. Fortunately, we were gobbled up, assimilated into the Borg that is Pfizer. And I was really struck to hear that the autism unit at Pfizer wasn't initiated because the commercial organization had done some landscaping assessment and said, wow, there's opportunity here, we should be doing this, and then turn to the research organization and say, thou shalt now create medicines for us to serve this economic opportunity. It was actually created by a collection of parents, champions internally from different parts of the organization who activated and then organized information that made the business case, the value argument that Pfizer could understand, and then in turn created the unit. And this can happen in organizations large and small, but I think you're in the best position as an organization to, one, find that champion, but help a company understand why NF1 would be valuable for them. What's the state of the science? Why would this be tractable to us? What do you know about the size of the community, the market? I think being able to organize information you already have in that registry is taking it beyond just having it. And I think that would be a key piece of advice. And you may need help there. You may need, again, someone internally to look at what is going on in a community and be able to translate that into a value argument that a company would understand and then continue to nurture that. But you're going to be knocking on a lot of doors to find that.
Right person, right?
Sorry?
Till you find that right person.
Yeah,
right?
but you have a lot of the pieces. I mean, from what you said, you have a lot of the things that people would ask for and need. And you said it as to how important is that genomics data. It's important, but it's not like you don't have, you have a lot of the pieces that people would look for, and it's not that you can't get it. So I think you're doing exactly the right thing in what you're building up and building up those databases. And so from that aspect, you're doing the right things.
Indeed.
Thank you.
I would, just one quick thing, I'd love to talk to you after, because I know a bit about your disorder and might be of some help.
And the only thing I'd like to add is that don't be afraid to ask, right? So if somebody has a question and we can't answer it, the likelihood that we have friends, like Sarah pointing to Ultragenics, we have a lot of friends. And industry seems unapproachable and huge, but it's not. And we all know each other. We know the science that everybody does. So if it's not something that's applicable to our technology, I could tell you maybe who you could go to. Yeah. So it's just, I think the bottom line is don't be afraid to ask. There are people like me that will get your email and I'll answer.
Yeah, and just, you'd be surprised how many scientists, me, a scientist, we all got into this guild of science hoping that someday the work we're doing will leave some fingerprint on something that really matters to people. And you know, as you move forward in your career, depending on where you do that, I toiled away in obscurity in industry for a long time. There's a certain level of disenchantment that can happen that can be remedied right away if you can be connected to something meaningful. If what you know about how the machine works, or what you know about how science is done could actually help jumpstart something for a community that needs it. There are people throughout the entire ecosystem that are waiting for that call, I think. Not everybody's going to take it, but you know, I think you'd be surprised how many individuals who are not personally touched by the disorder you're interested in are going to be willing to step forward and be something other than what they do. And you just have to go out there and make it happen.
Did any come in? Did any come in on the?
How many organizations have registries here that are? And are you working with, maybe someone can reflect on this, are the registries being created working with a specific company or a specific investigator, or how can people share some of your learnings with that? Or you?
Hi, Tracy Van Houten with Batten Disease Group. We actually had an EU-sponsored research project that was picked up, and it's a combination registry and natural history. It was actually funded by, early on, 10 years ago, by someone who's here at this conference. But we developed that over the years with the EU grant. Our organizations personally funded it for several years, and that became the basis of the clinical trial for the recent approval of Brineura for CLN2 form of Batten disease.
Wow.
So it's sort of a public-private partnership that developed.
That's great.
Hi, we had a similar story. We had an EU-funded grant that had 9 research institutions, a pharma, a small biotech, and 2 patient organizations that were part of the grant. And it was to do a clinical trial and also to fund a registry, and it was for 4 years, and it ended in 2015. And then we were like, we can't lose this important research. And so there are 9 organizations for our disorder around the world, and we formed an umbrella organization and are coordinating to do that because it's a big job for small organizations. So we're working together on it to fund this registry, and we have all the clinical centers still entering data from it. And we're making it a rule that any grants we fund for natural histories, they have to put the information into our registry, because a lot of them want to keep it on their own, in their own one. Say, well, you can have your own, but you have to also put the information into our registry. And so, but we got a big grant to last us for the next 2 years, but then we're worried, like, we have this important research, we have to make sure it goes on, and it's hard when you're small organizations, you're trying to fund research. and then also trying to find money for these. And it's at a research institution right now, but the goal in the community is that the patient organizations will ultimately own the registry and take full control, but financially, we don't have the funds to do that yet. So I don't know, do you have any tips on how we might continue and get funding for that?
Well, I think one advice, and this is maybe more aimed at those who are thinking about creating their registry, and it comes from learnings of watching other organizations, in many ways inventing wheels over and over again. And, something that I always worry about, given the increasingly digital nature of science and the ability now to share, access, share, and crunch large amounts of data, is the ability for databases to talk to one another and to think about how information is structured, because you may have solved the creation of your own registry for your own fit, and it may not be able to talk to another database. And in time, one could easily conceive of a federated series of databases, registries, that allow companies to recruit from many different communities or view people based on information. And if you've not thought through how to plan for that, that can be an issue. But step one needs to be, how do you sustain this over time? Oftentimes you'll get an initial grant. Maybe it could be a PCORI grant, it could be any number, but that will run out. So how are you thinking as an organization about managing your revenue? Is the registry more important than giving out a fellowship here or a research project over there? I think each organization will have to think through that themselves, but sustainability is crucial. A lot of registries go dormant after the funding runs out.
We were part of the Genetic Alliance Biobank on our own, our organization, and we couldn't afford it. And we had to take our samples and give them to a researcher and say, here's what we had so far. Yeah. So we're trying to avoid that the second time around. Yeah.
I think one of the other aspects with registries, and I guess in science in general, that science, it takes a village. And it only really moves forward when there's that collaboration. And that collaboration is also around sharing of knowledge. And I think one of the ways to also drive attention to your registry and support from our funding is to publish from it and to find how you can share the information that you have. Because by sharing the information that you have, you're demonstrating the value.
Yep.
And you're demonstrating the value and then demonstrating the importance for that to continue.
Do you think that is a good selling point, that we have all of these researchers at clinical centers around the world contributing to the database? And they are publishing based on the EU grant. So, and that's data that is in the registry. So we should make that known to industry that this information is there.
Absolutely.
And as soon as that's published, then too, we can offer this information to industry, because it's been closed until that study is done.
And I think that's an important point, is really be proactive in showcasing what you've built and how it's creating value for that research process. And, having worn the hat of a funder, there's nothing less compelling about funding something than if you gave money initially and it hasn't done what it should have done, and that is grow, support publications, et cetera. Absolutely critical. I'm surprised, and I see some foundations do this better than others. Why not create an annual newsletter, or publication that summarizes everything that was done out of that registry, how it's grown, what publications have come out of it, what those publications have done to advance the story. Even if you can't get a meeting with someone in industry, that's something that can be attached to an email and shared. It may find that champion that way. I just think being able to share what you're doing is oftentimes very surprising to me. There's great resources that no one knows about, and it doesn't take much to actually advertise that.
Hi. So Sandra Tallbird from Cure Catacil. And we had quite a different experience, and hopefully this will be helpful for some of the smaller nonprofit organizations. Because we're a very small organization, early in development, and as we started going to conferences like these, we started hearing, you have to have a patient registry, you have to have a patient registry. So about 3 years ago, we started looking into it. Looked at all the various resources out there and was surprised to find we're small in terms of our resources, but there were more options than I would have thought for a free platform for a registry. And so we felt like we did our due diligence in terms of looking at universities, got a lot of precautionary advice that, you want the patients to own the data. You don't really want to get tied up in a university. The company I work for was they do registries, but same thing, you want the patients to own the data. And so the three main platforms that were free that we looked into to see if it was a good fit for us was Patient Crossroads, which has now been bought by Invitae, and they're here at the conference. Sanford Chords is also a free platform, and they're also here at the conference and have a table right out there. And what was the other one? Oh, NORD. NORD now has the natural history study, but I think it kicked off about 1.5 years or 2 years ago, and we were just right before that. So we ended up with the Patient Crossroads, now Invitae platform, which was great for where we were back then. It is all patient-reported outcomes, so it's not the clinical data, the rich clinical data that you have, and we're not working with clinicians, and that's what we see as our next step, is developing disease-specific surveys, which might start to have some nominal costs, and we're applying for a grant to take the registry to the next level, where we could have clinician-reported outcomes. But it's really great, and we're starting to publish some of the outcomes in the registry, so that's good to hear as a good practice. But it's also good for me to hear both of your experiences about, if we do take that next step. The grant we're applying for is a 2-year grant, and so to be careful about what's going to happen when that money dries up.
I'm curious if anybody here or outcomes, apps available, or there are new technology. Thanks. In assisting with patient-reported outcomes, our population is young men. They usually experience the need for dialysis or transplantation in their early 20s. And right now, the university that houses our registry has everything via mail. And I don't know if 19-year-olds in 2017 know what a stamp is.
Probably not. Yeah.
So having them sign things and mail it back and physically sending things is cumbersome. And I was just curious if anybody here was working with patient-reported apps or anything of that nature that could assist the process for our people.
I think you've got certainly someone.
So one of our researchers has a website, and they hired a company to create patient-reported outcomes, natural history studies, and things like that. And so the families just log in once every 6 months and put their information that's requested into this website. It's very easy. They can do it any time of day, and that's patient-reported outcomes. So that is something. It wasn't cheap to do, though. That's the problem, funding. I don't have a number. They didn't share it with us, but it's probably a couple $100,000 at least. And that's not. Then you have to have the people to keep it up to date and read it and all that stuff. But it is possible to do, and I'm sure it'll get cheaper and easier as time goes on. And if you can marry that to a clinician database so it's all in one place, that's what we want to do eventually. But again, money. You need money.
Well, necessity does drive a lot of it, and there are companies that are developing digital tools to help collect longitudinal data in the context of clinical trials, secondary data as well as the actual outcome measure that would be used to ultimately get a medicine approved. I think you'll see a lot of innovation come from that space. How it gets disseminated more broadly to drive research not related to getting medical products approved, is an open question. And I think this is a real area of opportunity for the field to take on board. The one example I'm thinking of is Janssen's JAKE platform, the Janssen Autism Knowledge Engine, which is a suite of tools that help a parent organize the care circle around an individual and serve the needs of the parent, but gets ongoing data from parents, teachers, therapists. But at the center of this is a new outcome measure called the Autism Behavioral Inventory, which will be an endpoint used to approve medicines in the autism space in the future, hopefully. And I think these are great examples of innovations that are coming forward. This is out of industry. I haven't seen much outside that, but it's not an area I'm an expert in.
Since you were asking about the registries, I was going to mention we joined Simon's VIP Connect, and that has, for the at least for the moment, been a good option for us since they're studying. We're one of the single genes that they've added this year. So
right.
And then she's been in the same boat, and there's several of us. I know it's a limited group, but I reached out to them this year. Well, I reached out to them last year, reached out to them again, and then they finally added us, and we're up to 6 people in the last few months. So
you might reconnect with them too. They have a large project called Spark. Have you heard this? The Simons Project for Autism Knowledge, Research Knowledge. And this project's goal is to recruit 50,000 autism families into a longitudinal study that collects behavioral data, biosensor, the whole shebang, if you will, data. And I know they're still recruiting for that. Whether or not other monogenic causes of autism would be included in that is something you could bring up with them.
okay.
Yeah, and I'm sure it feeds into the same data architecture that VIP is using.
I think it does.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, one more question.
As I mentioned previously, with the recently approved therapy now for CLN2 form of Batten disease, as we look at other therapeutic strategies in this disease, what are going to be important touch points for us to talk to or sell to industry to get companies to continue to go into our field, as the current therapy is a high burden on families and may not touch all aspects of the disease?
So I think one of the aspects is where you have a proven regulatory path that, you hear companies where companies will talk about de-risking. Drug development is really hard, and there's a very high level of risk in any program that you initiate. So mechanisms whereby you can reduce that risk, obviously become really important. One of the things in looking at where there is a proven regulatory path, that actually helps de-risk, because it gives you, from an industry, and when you're talking in industry language, it gives someone from an industry an idea of, okay, these are the types of things that we know we could do, and this is the type of way that we could, the types of mechanisms that we could use to get to an approval. I think sharing that, in particular, the journey around both from early development through to late stage and through to the dialogue that took place with the regulators is really, really important. The other aspect is, people talk about unmet need all the time. And one of the things is conveying that whilst there is a treatment, the clearer you can tell, most people communicate in stories, and they hear in stories, and they listen in stories. So the clearer you can tell that story as to, whilst there has been a step forward, what life is now like today, and where those specific needs are, the better. If you can take some of those specific needs as to what someone might do in a clinical study and what might then inform a different sets of endpoints for a clinical program. That's also a really important way to help and to get interest and attention from industry. I think the other aspect is that one of the things for the company that's already in the space is partnering with them. Yeah, they've done it once and have one approved treatment. What else can be done? That's probably your best mechanism.
I agree. That's a huge, asset to have is success.
Because success breeds success.
Breeds, they're going to want to know what can we do now to differentiate from that. What's unmet after that? And if you've got nothing but failures or an absence of approved treatments, then they'll perceive risk there, and that's a harder hill to get over.
So that concludes our morning breakouts, and I want to thank you all for joining us. Before we head out to enjoy our lunch, generously sponsored by Pfizer, please jump on the mobile app and take one brief survey for the session. And then finally, I'd like to thank both Rob and Sarah so very much for sharing their insights. If we can give them one last round of applause, please.